In a quiet village nestled between gently sloping hills and dense whispering woods, there lived an elderly man, known by the locals not for his grand words or bold gestures, but for the calm that seemed to follow wherever he went. His name was whispered with a kind of reverence that went beyond admiration. It was the type of respect one holds for something sacred. Yet few could truly explain why being in his presence brought them a strange sense of comfort and clarity, like a fog lifting from the soul. He was 73 years old, a figure of calm shaped not by ease, but by seasons of inner struggle and years of mindful discipline. Travelers from far beyond the valley would come simply to sit near him, hoping to absorb a fragment of whatever secret he carried. But the truth was simple. There was no magic, no hidden technique. The peace people felt was born from the quiet rituals he had lived by for decades. 10 habits, repeated not for show, but because they were the soil in which his inner stillness had taken root. The first of these was deep presence. He didn't speak of mindfulness or recite teachings from books. His life was the lesson. When he was with someone, whether it was a child chasing insects or an elder grieving loss, he gave them the whole of his attention. His gaze didn't drift. His hands didn't fidget. He wasn't waiting for his turn to speak. He was simply fully there. There was something in that stillness that gently commanded respect. The kind of respect that doesn't shout, but is felt. It was through this habit that people began to feel seen, really seen, for perhaps the first time in a long while. The second habit was true listening, not the kind where you nod while thinking of what you'll say next. No, he listened with his eyes, his breath, his still posture. He listened not only to words but to the pauses between them, to what the speaker meant but didn't know how to say. Often people would break into tears mid-sentence, overwhelmed not by his replies, but by the rare, disarming experience of being deeply heard. His presence acted like a mirror, gentle, unwavering, and free of judgment. Then there was humility, the third habit, which came so naturally to him that many forgot he was once a scholar, a teacher, and a man who had been offered roles of leadership many times. He had declined each one, choosing instead to plant trees, share meals with strangers, and live simply. When praised, he would smile, not dismissively, but with a warmth that gently redirected the attention elsewhere. He saw wisdom not as something to be owned, but something to be passed on like water through open hands. And in doing so, he invited others to drop their masks and meet him as equals. The fourth habit was compassion in action. For him, compassion wasn't a poetic idea. It was movement. When someone in the village was grieving or ill, he didn't offer empty platitudes. He'd show up with a warm bowl of soup, offer to fix a broken fence, or quietly sit beside them without asking for details. His kindness was not loud, but it was unmistakable, and slowly the entire village began to mimic this behavior, not because they were told to, but because kindness had become contagious. The fifth habit was non-judgment. In a place where gossip could spread faster than wildfire, he remained a steady, neutral presence. He didn't pretend people were perfect, but he chose to see their wholeness rather than define them by their worst moments. When someone made a mistake, he didn't react with shock or scorn. He asked questions, he listened, he offered space to reflect. This made even the most troubled individuals feel safe in his presence, and that safety often became the seed of transformation. Then there was patience, the sixth habit, which he wore like a second skin. There's a story often told in the village of a boy who came to him asking to be taught the way. The master gave him a broom and pointed toward a grove of trees. "Clear the leaves," he said. The boy did, but more leaves kept falling. Frustrated, the boy returned after 3 days saying, "You're not teaching me anything." The master smiled and said, "Then you're not yet ready." Years later, the boy returned, older, softer, and asked to sweep again. The leaves were still falling, but this time he no longer needed answers. That was the lesson. The seventh habit was gratitude, not in the performative sense we see so often today, but as a quiet reverence for ordinary things. He'd close his eyes just to feel the warmth of the sun on his skin. He'd pause mid-step to admire the way a dewdrop held onto a blade of grass. "Gratitude," he once said, "isn't something you write down, it's something you breathe." And people around him began to notice beauty where they had once seen only routine. The rhythm of life became a little softer, a little brighter. His eighth habit was unshakable integrity. He didn't need to remind others of his values. They were etched into every action. If he said he would be somewhere, he was. If someone confided in him, their words were never repeated. Whether he was speaking with a child or a visiting official, he was the same, honest, humble, and clear. Over time, his word became as trusted as the sunrise. People believed in him, not because he asked them to, but because he earned it, quietly over decades. The ninth habit was self-reflection. Each night, long after the village had gone quiet, he would sit in his small room lit only by a single candle. There, he would silently replay the day, not to judge himself but to learn. Where did I lose patience? He'd ask himself. Did I truly listen today? These questions weren't for punishment, they were invitations to grow. This practice, done in solitude and without dramatics, kept him grounded, humble, and forever curious. And finally, the 10th habit, generosity without expectation. He gave what he had, time, knowledge, energy, even his quiet company, to anyone in need. And he gave freely. Yet curiously, it seemed he never lacked. Others came to realize that the more he gave, the more he seemed to have. It was as if his generosity opened a hidden well within him, one that never ran dry. Through this habit, he taught the village something priceless. True wealth is not in what we hold on to, but in what we give away without fear. As the seasons passed and the master's steps grew slower, something remarkable began to take shape, not in stone, nor in books, but in the people around him. His way of living quietly began to echo in the way the villagers moved, spoke, paused. The children who once ran past him now slowed down to greet him. Farmers began to share tools and time. Even disagreements, once quick to erupt, softened under the influence of his example. He had never given a formal sermon, never held a public class, yet he was the most influential figure the village had ever known. People often wondered, how did he change so many lives without ever trying to? The answer was hidden in plain sight. His impact wasn't created through force, it flowed from consistency. Those 10 habits, lived daily and without performance, became invisible threads that stitched the community together. Where once there was suspicion, now lived trust. Where there had been hurry, now there was rhythm. And where many felt unseen, they now found a mirror. It's easy to imagine that such habits belong only to the few, to those who live in silence and solitude. But the truth is, these practices are deeply human. They're not exclusive to monks or sages. They're available to anyone willing to pause even for a moment and choose to act differently. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people like you, people who feel the weight of their presence and want to carry it with care. Perhaps you're watching this and something is stirring within you. Maybe you've felt lately that life is too fast, too loud, too filled with distractions. Maybe you've been longing for a deeper kind of connection, not just with others, but with yourself. That longing, that quiet ache, it's not a weakness. It's your inner wisdom knocking, inviting you to come home to something real. If these words resonate with you, let me gently invite you to stay connected. Not in the usual smash that like button way, but in a way that respects your time, your energy, and your depth. Consider subscribing to this channel, not just to follow content, but to walk alongside a space that honors quiet growth. This channel isn't about fast fixes. It's about tending to the slow work of becoming. And if at any point during this video something touched you, a sentence, a feeling, a memory, don't let it pass without acknowledgement. Share it in the comments, not as a favor to the algorithm, but as a way to mark the moment for yourself. Sometimes writing down a reflection is the first step in making it real, and who knows, what you share might become the exact message someone else needed to hear today. You could even share this video with someone close to you, not out of obligation, but out of care. Think of someone who might be carrying too much, someone who needs silence but doesn't know how to ask for it. Send this their way with a simple note. This made me think of you. No pressure, just presence, just like the master would have done. Because ultimately these habits, presence, listening, humility, compassion, they're not grand gestures. They're small choices made again and again. And when we start making them even imperfectly, our lives begin to change. Not overnight, not with fireworks, but gently, like sunlight warming a cold stone. The master never sought followers. He didn't want admiration. What he offered was far more radical. He gave people back to themselves. He reminded them of who they were beneath the armor. He helped them believe quietly that it was safe to live from the heart. He once told a young woman who came to him burdened by grief, "You don't need to do anything extraordinary to be loved, but if you practice living with presence and kindness, you'll find that love begins to follow you without asking permission." Those words stayed with her. Years later, she became a teacher, not of philosophy or religion, but of life. And when people asked what inspired her, she'd simply say, "There was a man who swept leaves and changed everything." The leaves, of course, still fell. They always would. But now there were many hands to sweep them, and many hearts who understood the meaning of that simple act. In the final years of the Master's life, something subtle but powerful began to happen. It wasn't announced, it wasn't declared. It simply unfolded like mist lifting at sunrise. People no longer came to him only for answers. They began to come just to sit, to share silence, to sweep the courtyard by his side. And when they returned to their homes, they carried with them more than his words. They carried a new rhythm. This rhythm didn't erase hardship or grief. The villagers still faced loss, storms still came, harvests sometimes failed, but something had shifted. There was a new way of holding life, with gentleness, with less panic, more trust. The Master had not made their problems disappear. What he had done, through a life lived with intention, was help them suffer less alone. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind. He never sought to be remembered, but memories are curious things. They linger where love has been planted. And so, even after his final day, people still left small offerings on the stone bench where he used to sit. A flower, a folded note, a warm loaf of bread. Not out of ritual, but gratitude. For many, he had been the first person to truly see them. And in that seeing, something inside them had awakened. There was a young man, quiet, once angry at everything, who took over tending the garden after the Master passed. He didn't say much, but his hands learned how to move like the Master's had. Slow, deliberate, listening to the earth. Over time, others joined him, not because he asked, but because they too wanted to feel grounded. And so the garden flourished, not just with plants, but with stories, laughter, silence. In that space, you could still feel the Master's spirit, not as a ghost, but as an echo of every choice made in presence, kindness, and stillness. You see, these 10 habits are not relics from a different era. They are blueprints for a life that breathes. In a world driven by speed, performance, and noise, it can feel rebellious, even radical, to slow down and live this way. But that's the quiet revolution. Not to fight fire with fire, but to meet the chaos with steadiness. Not to argue louder, but to listen deeper. Not to accumulate more, but to live with enough. And maybe, just maybe, to become a small source of peace in someone else's storm. If you've made it this far, I want to say something that matters. Thank you, not in passing. Not as a phrase tossed at the end. Truly, thank you for being the kind of person who listens deeply, who reflects, who still believes in a gentler kind of strength. And if this story lives with you now, even in the smallest way, I'd love for you to stay with us. Not just by clicking subscribe, though yes, please do if it feels right, but by choosing to return here when you need quiet, clarity, or company. Think of this space as a bench in that old garden. It will be here like the Master was, not to fix you, not to preach, but to remind you of what you already know but sometimes forget, that you matter, that your presence can heal, that your stillness is powerful. So subscribe if you'd like a space that honors your pace. Share this if you think someone out there could use a breath. And leave a comment if something here made you pause, even briefly. Because in the end, none of this is about numbers. It's about connection. It's about remembering that even in the busiest world, there's always room for stillness. So take a breath, place your feet on the ground, and carry these 10 habits not like a burden, but like a quiet lantern, one that lights the path, not with force, but with presence.